What's happening, fam? John here from AF Anime, back again with another One Piece chapter review, this time for chapter 1046, which is simply titled Raizo. Now, although I do agree that simplicity is often the best route to take, when it comes to this chapter's title, I'm not really a fan of it, and I'll elaborate more on that towards the discussion portion of the video. Speaking of that, if you guys are here for the discussion and rating portion of the video and don't really care to recap the events, go ahead and skip to this point in the video where we'll get right into those topics. Now, with that out of the way, we can go ahead and get started with the recap for 1046, and first we're going to talk about the cover page as per usual. And unlike last week's chapter, this week we do pick back up with the Germa storyline and Emotionless Excursion. And the title of this cover page is Two Intruders in Pudding's Home, Chocolate Town. And interestingly enough, we don't really see Pudding in this cover page, but we do get someone who is front and center with a couple interesting things about him. For one, I don't recognize him as any of Big Mom's children, so maybe he's just a servant or a random citizen of Chocolate Town. But he does have this interesting bubble above his head, and I can't really tell if that's supposed to be an 8 and a random symbol or just a really stylized exclamation point. I guess you'll just have to let me know in the comment section down below what your thoughts are on him and his thought bubble. But from what we can tell, or what we can best assume, these two characters are very likely to be the two remaining Vinsmoke children. And while the silhouette of 1 foot per each character really isn't enough to go on here, but we do see that there are some capes, which I believe that every one of the Vinsmoke children seem to sport when they have their raid suits on. And I don't want to toot my own horn here, but my assumption is when I first saw Pudding enter this cover story, it was that she would be the one who was eventually going to release the two siblings because they assisted Sanji's escape. And sure enough, if this is Ichiji and Reiju, then they're almost certainly going to fill in the gaps of the story about what went down between her siblings and their siblings. And most likely, if Pudding knows that they helped Sanji, she's going to let them all go. I mean, that's my speculation anyway. So we'll go ahead and move on from this cover page, but let me know in the comment section down below how you think this cover story has been turning out so far. I know I've had my complaints and I've said that this cover story has been a bit too slow for my taste, but it really seems like the past couple chapters where we got this cover page, it's been picking up in pace a little bit, so I do appreciate that. But enough about the cover story already. We're all here for chapter 1046, and it starts off where the last one left off, and Kaido is beginning to collect himself from the attack that Luffy sent flying through his face in the last chapter. And we get an interesting arrangement of panels on the first page with Kaido asking Luffy once again, "Who are you?" And of course, with Oda being Oda, he follows this question up with two panels that are of Zunisha referring to Luffy as Joy Boy and his excitement for knowing Luffy to be Joy Boy. Now, that is interesting for a couple reasons, but we do get this line from Zunisha harkening back to Joy Boy and referring to Luffy as some person he can put his hopes in. And we cut back to Luffy, who answers Kaido's question by saying, "Hey, I'm Monkey D. Luffy. I'm the man who's going to surpass you and become the Pirate King." Now, I'll admit I thought for sure that Luffy was going to refer to himself as Joy Boy, and part of me was really hoping that he would. I am actually okay with this line, and I'll explain that in the discussion part of the video. But for now, we're going to move on, and Kaido gives Luffy a quick breakdown of exactly what an awakening is for a devil fruit. And again, he refers to Luffy's devil fruit as being ridiculous, and he says certainly ridiculous. So it kind of makes me wonder if Kaido might already have some knowledge about this devil fruit or this mythical Zoan fruit, but again, we'll talk about that later. But as the page goes on, Kaido mentions things that he has lost throughout this entire event, and Luffy talks about taking something back for him, although we don't actually get to hear what it is. And after this brief amount of dialogue, we are treated to these two pretty good panels of Kaido and Luffy both using Gatling type abilities. Kaido's being the Kundali Dragonstorm, and Luffy's being unnamed, but it kind of looks like his Gatling. The only difference being that he's also using his Gear 5, so we can actually see some rubber-like qualities being transferred onto Kaido by Luffy's Devil Fruit. Now, we can see from this panel here that Luffy's pretty exhausted, and Kaido's starting to try to get in his head a little bit by mentioning how many people below are going to die because of the fire. But Luffy pays him no mind and says that I've got people down there I've put this in the hands of, let them worry about it. And then after Luffy states that all he has to do is defeat Kaido, Kaido sends off another move which is called Demolition Gust, to which Gear 5 Luffy in his typical cartoonish fashion just kind of lifts up and stretches his legs to avoid the attack. And then we move on to the performance floor where we see the reunification of Nami and Chopper. And although they get a whole page to themselves, we just get a bit of exposition as to why they can't help the other Straw Hats at the moment and why Zeus can't just put out the flames. And then starting with the next page, we're going to start jumping around a bit as we start off in the castle basement with some falling debris and fire and one of the smile fruit users freaking out. And then next we go to the first floor where we see Beppo and some of the heart pirates carrying Beppo to try to escape the flames. And then next we go back to the basement to check up with two straw hats in the form of Robin and Brook. And we got some samurai who jokingly believe that Brook is just a charred corpse at this point, but for the most part we don't get a whole lot of information from them either. Now right after that we go back to the pleasure hall with yet another straw hat in the form of Sanji, and he's also trying to plot an escape but really doesn't offer anything of substance or anything to change the situation. And then we go back to the basement again to check up with Scratchman and Pooh and the number he went with, and that number seemed to have burned his hand. Scratchman and Pooh ostracizes him a little bit and it seems to agitate the giant, and it looks like they might be getting into it here pretty soon. We don't get any confirmation on that because we bounce around again. Now we're going to a different area of the basement here where Usopp is front and center, and also much like the last Straw Hats that we checked up with, he doesn't have a whole lot to add to the situation. I mean, he does attempt to put out some flames with a green star move, but it ultimately is not effective at all. And then he just states that he really wants to fulfill his promise to save Okiku and Kinemon. And to continue the trend of bouncing around, next we go to the right brain tower where we catch up with Frankie, who is carrying Zoro and trying to escape the flames with some smile fruit users behind him, comically asking for his help. Now ultimately we don't learn a whole lot from this situation, but we do hear from Frankie that he's trying to get Zoro to Chopper, so at least we do have some kind of path or goal for him to be trying to attain. And the next time we jump around, it's actually to the 4th floor where we catch up with Raizo, the namesake of this chapter, and Jinbei, a straw hat who actually has a bit of an important role in this chapter. So it looks like Raizo and Jinbei have come up with a plan on how to at least alleviate some of the pressure and tension that the flames are adding to this whole situation on Onigashima. And it appears that this is going to be a combination of ninjutsu and Fishman karate. But before we get to see that, we're treated to a couple flashbacks that would actually set up this horribly plot convenient event. And we see that Raizo was having a flashback to searching for the Kozukis amidst all the flames, as well as a flashback where he was on Zou, and while he was witnessing the great downpour that was caused by Zunisha taking a bath, he asked Inuyarashi if he could take some of the water for himself. And that sets up the big event of this chapter where he uses his squirrel technique to summon all the water from Zunisha's bath in the elephant bath technique. And as Raizo promised, this creates a great flood that Jinbei can actually use his Fishman karate to attempt to put out all the flames in Onigashima. Now, we aren't 100% sure exactly how effective this is, at least by this chapter's end, but from what we can tell, he's managed to save a good amount of people, including Killer and some of his men who are trying to help him escape. Now, we got 2 pages left of this chapter, and one of them is dedicated to Momonosuke and Yamato, and it looks like Yamato is trying to prep up Momonosuke to get ready to create his own flame clouds in the case that Kaido should be defeated. Now, it is good to see some pressure being applied to Momonosuke, but ultimately we don't get anywhere in this chapter. The last page is dedicated to going back to Luffy and Kaido, and we get this very interesting panel here of Luffy grabbing some actual lightning, and it's unclear whether or not he created this or if this is just another one of those goofy things that his devil fruit can do. Ultimately, we'll just have to see, but the chapter itself ends with the quote that Onigashima is going to fall, and then we get a side-by-side panel of Luffy versus Kaido again. So that is going to do it for my recap of chapter 1046, and if you have to know my rating, it's going to be an 8 out of 10. Ultimately, it was a good chapter. It was really nice to catch up with all of the Straw Hats in this chapter just to get a brief update, but it kind of only just served to kind of slow down the whole event between Kaido and Luffy, which I don't think really needs to be done at all. And then we get the artwork in this chapter, which really isn't super impressive. We get some good panels and some interesting panels, but just nothing that's really amazing looking. So in terms of story and hype, it's just not quite there. The artwork's not quite there either, but ultimately it still does feel on par with the last couple chapters where we do get some interesting reveals and some important stuff going on. So it just seems like it is building up a bit, just isn't one of the best chapters in terms of what we've been getting recently. So now we can go ahead and get on to some discussion, and one of the first things that I want to discuss is the topic of Joy Boy, Luffy, Zunisha, Luffy's devil fruit. And from the line we got from Zunisha in this chapter, I kind of got the feeling that Zunisha was referring to his relationship to the Joy Boy of the past. And in the previous chapter where Luffy was awakening as Joy Boy, we kind of got the impression that Zunisha was referring to Joy Boy as Luffy. So these two things don't kind of mesh well, but maybe it kind of does in the grand scheme of things. Ultimately, if Joy Boy is supposed to be a, prophecy of sorts where he's destined to return, or is a reoccurring role of sorts, then maybe this would make sense. But ultimately, I do want to see whether or not this means that Luffy returning as Joy Boy is a kind of fulfillment of sorts to the promise that Zunisha made to someone in the past to roam the world and to keep the people of the Mink tribe on his back until the return of Joy Boy, where the Mink could eventually be free. I mean, I am kind of getting the feeling that Joy Boy and Luffy are one and the same in a lot of ways, especially when it comes to the Devil Fruit, in the sense that it is considered a mythical Zoan that the world government has been trying desperately to get their hands on, but is just fallen short every time they've gotten close. So all of the tidbits of information that we've gotten so far about Joy Boy, Luffy, and the exposition that we've gotten from Zunisha, I do get the feeling that this is kind of Oda's way of slowly building up the hype around this whole situation and this whole prophecy, but I can't help but feel like it is kind of going very slow and kind of being broken up to kind of keep us on our toes and on the edge of our seats, waiting for this full-blown explanation. Now, as far as the Gear 5 thing goes, we do get some flexing of the Gear 5 abilities, but ultimately there isn't anything new that we haven't seen already when it comes to how he displayed his Devil Fruit powers in this chapter, or how he manipulated Kaido into being more rubber-like himself. Then we get the line from Kaido again asking who exactly he is, and we get the exposition from Zunisha that implies that he is in fact Joy Boy, but may not know it himself. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is how this chapter jumped around all over the place to kind of touch base with every Straw Hat Pirate and where they currently are and how they're currently dealing with their situations at hand. And obviously, when it comes to Jinbei and Raizo's situation in this chapter, they did kind of serve as a savior of sorts to kind of slow down things. It doesn't necessarily seem like the flames have actually all been taken care of, but for the most part, they've probably managed to buy some time. Now, by no means, I don't find this to be any kind of bad storytelling. I just don't think that this chapter should have been titled Raizo, in the sense that we don't really get a whole lot of them being present in this chapter, although the actions they took are super relevant to what may go down in the very near future when it comes to this raid and how the ending of Onigashima plays out. And when it comes to Raizo in particular, I kind of just can't help but feel like the flashbacks that we got and the whole setup of him using his scroll fruit to store all of that water, it really kind of feels like a huge plot convenience to the whole, Onigashima being on fire situation. I thought the whole flame setup, because it kind of served to add a good amount of tension and danger to the situation for every character on Onigashima aside from Kaido and Luffy, who were fighting. Not to mention that if Luffy beat Kaido, it wouldn't just immediately resolve all of the problems for every person on Onigashima in a similar way that Luffy defeating Doflamingo would dissolve the birdcage and save everyone from immediate danger. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that this takes away from Oda's writing capabilities. I'm just saying that this Raizo situation, with him having a near infinite amount of water for Jinbei to just save all of Onigashima from the flames, it just feels a bit shoehorned. Now, moving on from that though, there is another topic worth talking about, and that is the conversation between Yamato and Momonosuke. Now, obviously, Luffy defeating Kaido doesn't just absolve all of the problems, as I said before, but Momonosuke does still have the responsibility on his shoulders to carry Onigashima to safety once all is said and done. Now, don't get me wrong, I still do very much like this approach for Oda to have Momonosuke carry the weight of his country on his shoulders once Kaido is defeated by Luffy, since he can't do it himself, but I can't help but feel like this is kind of a signal that the end is very close to being near. And my only problem that I can see with this whole situation is the fact that Momonosuke still seems kind of concerned and worried about his role in saving Wano, but ultimately he is still an 8-year-old kid trapped in a now 28-year-old body, so it'll just be very interesting to see what role he takes aside from just using his own flame clouds. He is still serving as a exposition dump for Zunisha and also has the voice of all things to some extent, so maybe once Kaido is defeated, he'll hear the lack of Kaido's voice and then take that as a kind of push come to shove moment to finally step up and do what he's supposed to do. And the last thing I want to talk about when it comes to this chapter is the last panel we get of Luffy in his Gear 5 form, aside from the side-by-side, and that is of him grabbing lightning. I mean, it is an amazing looking panel, but it does raise a whole lot of questions. Now, is this something that his devil fruit can do, as you know, him manipulating the things around him? Is he turning the lightning into rubber? Is he just grabbing lightning because his devil fruit allows him to do ridiculous things? I mean, this opens up a lot of doors, some of which I don't hope Oda walks down, but we'll just have to see how this plays out. I mean, when we think back to Don Flamingo and his awakening, he was actually able to manipulate clouds and turn them into strings. So this could just be a, you know, aspect of Luffy's awakened devil fruit, or maybe it's an ability specific to the sun god Nika. In any case, it's been a very long day, and this has been a very long video so far, at least in comparison to my previous ones. If you guys are still here, thank you very much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more content like this. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below about this chapter. We got a whole lot of time to talk about it, considering we have a break this upcoming week. Thank you guys very much again for tuning in. I'll see you guys in the next video.